Hector Luis El Güero Palmes, a founder of the Sinaloa Cartel, a powerful Mexican criminal organization. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration, this cartel is currently the main trafficker of fentanyl to the United States. In 1995, the authorities in Mexico were at the house of El Güero, founder of the Sinaloa Cartel, one of the most important narco organizations in the world. By that time, an accusation against him indicated that just between 88 and 90, the boss had smuggled more than a ton of white gold to the United States through 160 air shipments. While trying to reorganize his operations after years of conflicts and personal losses, would he take a break to attend a colleague's wedding? Instead, the authorities received information indicating that on June 23rd of 95, El Güero would take a jet in the city of Obregón bound for Toluca to attend the celebration. And that was the perfect moment to catch him and finally put him behind bars. But this man had his own informants, so when the day came, he was able to tell his pilots to take a different course. Finally, the plane or jet suffered a technical failure and crashed on the border between Jalisco and Nayarit. The drug dealer survived but was badly injured, and so he spent the next few hours healing in a safe house in Zapopan, Jalisco. However, nothing would prevent him from facing his fate, and this is what I'm going to tell you about today. The case of Hector El Güero Palma, the drug lord who terrorized all of Sinaloa. Let's start from the beginning. Who was he? Hector Luis Palma? He was born on April 29, 1960 in Noria de Abajo, a marginalized community in the municipality of Mocorito in Sinaloa, northwest of Mexico. He was raised in a low-income family, so he barely managed to finish elementary school. El Güero, as he was nicknamed due to his blonde hair and light eyes, he had to earn money to support his family. And there was no faster way than illicit businesses. He started by stealing cars and then selling the parts to illegal workshops. At a young age, he caught the attention of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, a former policeman. He was not a man of the law, but rather quite the opposite. He was known as the Godfather or the Boss of Bosses, and he was the leader of the Guadalajara Cartel. At that time, he controlled all the drug trafficking in Mexico. Felix Gallardo proposed to Guero to become his lieutenant. That is, he had to be a hitman to eliminate the competition. Shortly after starting his duties, this man, Guero, proved to be a hitman as ruthless as he was effective. Therefore, he was given a more important position. He was to control the smuggling of white gold to the United States, which originated from Sonora, one of the most important places in the entire country. It was then that his fate crossed with that of another thug, who was Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who also worked for Felix Gallardo. They were close in age and shared long-term goals, so they soon became friends. And by the year 87, both of their figures had grown so much within the cartel that they better decided to become independent from the patronage of Felix Gallardo. El Güero and El Chapo had one thing in their favor: the murder of Enrique Camarena Kiki, who was an undercover Drug Enforcement Administration agent. This happened in the year 85. The crime had put the Guadalajara cartel in the sights of the US government. In 89, Felix Gallardo was arrested. The same happened with two of his trusted brothers, who were Rafael Caro Quintero, nicknamed the Narco of Narcos, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, whose code name was Doneto. Perhaps these names sound a bit familiar to you. But even while he was incarcerated, the Boss of Bosses continued to be one of Mexico's main drug traffickers, maintaining the organization through a mobile phone. But it wasn't enough. Another of his trusted men, Juan Jose Esparragosa Moreno alias El Azul, left the prison for a few days to distribute the empire of his friend El Güero. He was in charge of traffic control in San Luis, Colorado, Sonora, a border town with the United States, and El Chapo inherited the business in Tecate, Baja California. For their part, the Arellano brothers, Felix, Benjamin, and Ramon, relatives of Felix Gallardo, took over Tijuana, one of the areas with the highest substance traffic on the northern border of Mexico. But a few months after the distribution, El Chapo and El Güero tried to take over that city. And then a conflict began, which is also known as a war. They partnered with Ismael El Mayo Zambada, forming the Sinaloa Cartel. The Arellano brothers and Felix left the Guadalajara Cartel, which ended up dissolving and created the famous Tijuana Cartel. When the Guadalajara cartel completely disappeared, they divided up the drug trafficking routes it had. That's how El Chapo and El Güero began to control the substance trafficking to the United States. But their former boss was not happy with their independence, so he joined forces with the Arellano Felix brothers to eliminate the new cartel from the map. A series of confrontations then began over the dispute of the main squares and routes between the Tijuana Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel, where massacres and even the use of bombs became common currency. As a result, both Mexico and the United States realized that organized crime was no longer as simple a problem as they thought, but they were facing large groups, as violent as they were strategic. Whether it was the government of the neighboring country or his own enemies, El Güero knew he was just a few steps away from being caught. So he recruited the best thugs in the business to serve in his ranks. That's when he came across Rafael Clavel Moreno, a Venezuelan who quickly earned his trust. He never suspected, obviously, that this decision would forever seal his fate. In this way, Rafael approached the Guero to the point where he managed to become his partner. Then he fell in love with his sister, managed to marry her, and one day he achieved his goal of getting close to Guadalupe Lega Serrano, the wife of the Guero. What the capo didn't suspect was that his new ally was nothing more and nothing less than an infiltrator, with specific orders to become part of his inner circle and betray him. Thus, taking advantage of Guero's absences due to his work, Rafael won Guadalupe's heart. He finally persuaded her to abandon him and elope together. She took out $2 million from her husband's account and they fled with their 2 children, Jesus, Hector, and Natalie, 4 and 5 years old, to the United States. Once in San Francisco, they stayed in a hotel and Rafael was able to carry out the last act of his sinister plan. First, he cut off the woman's upper part. In a refrigerated metal box, he sent this part, the head, to the blonde man. 15 days later, Rafael took Jesus, Hector, and Natalie to San Cristobal, Venezuela. There, he threw them off the bridge, the old viaduct that connects the city center with Concordia. Both minors, unfortunately, lost their lives after a free fall of 150 meters. Days later, Guero received a video in which you could see how Rafael threw his children towards the cliff towards their end. And this act forever changed the rules of the drug mafia in Mexico, which implicitly indicated that women and children were untouchable. About those responsible for ordering the attack against El Guero, there have always been 2 theories. The first suggests that Felix Gallardo would have taken revenge after the boss kept a part of the merchandise that had to cross into the United States and took over Tepic Nayarit, an important stronghold of the former Guadalajara cartel. And the second version indicates that the masterminds were the Arellano Felix brothers. As a result of the war that the Sinaloa cartel had been waging with Tijuana for a long time. But however it may have been, in honor of his wife and children, Guero ordered the construction of a luxury mausoleum estimated to be worth about $420,000. It was located in the Jardins de Humaya Cemetery in Culiacan, Sinaloa. And once it was ready, the boss began to plan his macabre revenge. El Güero ordered the capture of 9 friends and relatives of Felix Gallardo, and so it was motorized. A revenge that included people who had had direct and indirect roles in the unfortunate end of his family. In the blink of an eye, Mexican authorities began to find scattered remains in different areas of the country. All showed multiple blows, making it evident that they had suffered before their lives were taken. Among the deceased was the former mother-in-law of the ex-leader of the Guadalajara cartel, although some claim that it was actually a cousin of only 21 years old. The same occurred with a Tijuana cartel lawyer and 4 close relatives of the Arellano Felix. Once El Güero had taken revenge on the boss of bosses and the capos of the Tijuana cartel, he had to carry out the next part of the plan, get rid of the thug himself, his wife, the hitman. But Rafael was smart. He always kept a low profile. And he had quickly fled after carrying out this macabre plan to take the life of Guadalupe and the little ones. And after several months, similarly, Rafael was caught by the Venezuelan authorities and put behind bars for the crime against the minors. The bars of the jail, as you can already imagine, were not an impediment for Guero, but rather provided the perfect moment to attack. He planned a painful and meticulous revenge commensurate with what he had had to suffer. And he ordered that Rafael's 3 children, all minors, be killed. And just like his enemy, he also took some cruel photographs of the macabre act. The same fate was suffered by Rafael's 3 trusted men whose bodies were found in a ditch in Venezuela. And finally, El Güero gave the order he had been waiting for so long. From Sinaloa, he ordered that the man who had seduced his wife and taken the lives of his children be executed in prison. It was just a matter of a snap of fingers to erase Rafael from the map forever. However, for Güero, nothing was enough. He carried that fire that burned him inside for revenge. And in the 90s, he hired a group of 4 judicial police to take revenge on the activist. Norma Corona, who was known for defending victims of violence, including mafia bosses. At that time, she was investigating the crimes of 3 lawyers who had been in contact with Rafael. She believed that those colleagues of hers had been detained by corrupt uniformed officers deprived of their freedom. They had suffered and their lives had been taken as part of the war between criminal groups. Therefore, she had decided to represent their families and find the culprits. However, on May 21st of 90, Norma was brutally killed by gunfire inside her vehicle in Culiacan. Although the crime was categorized as one of the most well-known unsolved homicides in Mexico, the name of the Gio 1 Perforero has resonated since then. Then between 91 and 93, according to the North American government, the Gio 1 Ferro managed to smuggle 25 tons of white gold packaged in Chilean cans into the United States. In the midst of that, during 1992, he was accused of causing an attack at the Christine nightclub located in Puerto Vallarta where the brothers were. Arellano Felix. The hail of bullets left a toll of 10 lifeless people, but the Arellanos escaped alive. They were lucky. Then for 93, 7.3 tons of this white powder were seized from Guero, but he came out unscathed. The operation center continued to be Tepic Nayarit, the one he had stolen from the Guadalajara Cartel, located between 2 strategic entities for the mafia, which were Sinaloa and Jalisco. On May 24th of 93, the war between Sinaloa and those from Guadalajara escalated. Claiming the life of a celebrity who might sound familiar to you, Cardinal Juan Jesus Posazzo Campo. The official version indicates that the Arellano Felix set a trap at the Guadalajara airport where El Chapo would arrive. But they confused him with the religious man, shooting him repeatedly with powerful weapons. Subsequently, on the 9th of June of that same year, El Chapo was arrested in Guatemala for having outlived the cardinal that the enemy cartel had apparently orchestrated. El Güero and his partner El Mayo assumed control of the Sinaloa cartel's operations, but the future remained uncertain. The United States government was offering a reward of $1 million to anyone who could help capture El Güero. But when he was at the peak of his career, an event occurred that would later be renamed as the plane crash. And let me tell you, what is this plane crash? The 23rd of June, 95, El Güero took his private plane in the city of Obregón, heading to Toluca, state of Mexico, to attend a friend's wedding. But the army had received information about his schedule and planned to capture him when he landed, therefore, he couldn't land at his original destination. El Güero disguised himself in a full uniform of a federal judicial police officer with complete identification and the armed caravan of personnel. The jet was diverted to Zacatecas, where it also couldn't land due to the presence of police. The plane then continued on its way for several more hours until the fuel ran out. And due to a technical failure, the aircraft fell on agricultural land on the border between Jalisco and Nayarit. The 2 pilots who were traveling inside died and the blonde ended up injured. His men had to take him to a safe house in Zapopan, Jalisco. The next day, Mexican authorities found him treating his injuries in that house. In this place, they were able to identify him thanks to his ostentatious weapons. All of them were covered in gold and the grips were adorned with diamonds. He had also added the figure of a palm tree made of emeralds. This personal seal was what made the agents arrest him on the spot. His capture would reach all the media in Mexico, who were glad that El Güero, one of the visible faces of the golden age of narco, was behind bars. Subsequently, and due to the enormous amount of evidence against him, among which was the spectacular aerial escape, the judicial process was quite fast. After a few months, El Güero was put behind bars in the Puente Grande prison, Jalisco, where he coincided with his partner El Chapo, who had been arrested 2 years earlier. Some versions indicate that days before Guzman escaped from prison, in January of the year 2001, he said goodbye to his partner, promising him that he would help him escape as well. But he didn't, and El Güero was incarcerated for many more years. Unlike other drug lords, he was serious and didn't need luxuries. He walked through the prison corridors accompanied by 5 bodyguards and didn't greet anyone. He also didn't send others to beat up another inmate. He himself would settle scores with those who had disrespected him or whom he disliked. He had many enemies, that's for sure, inside the prison, and few inmates recognized him as a leader. In mid-January of 2007, after serving the first part of his sentence, Guero was extradited to the United States. There he was left in the hands of the Administration for the Drug Center. This event was perceived as an achievement of bilateral security cooperation. The arrival in the country of one of the world's most wanted drug lords not only surprised the media, but also the American authorities, who were not prepared for the case. They then had to gather all the possible evidence they had obtained over 10 years to accuse him of conspiring to traffic substances into that country. Concurrently, they had to indict Osiel Cardenas Guillen, head of the Gulf Cartel, who was also extradited. And it was a difficult task, but not impossible. Until finally, the Güero pleaded guilty to substance trafficking and also claimed to be bankrupt. A United States court sentenced him to 29 years in prison for the same charge. He was incarcerated in the high-security prison of San Quentin in Northern California. His trial in the North American country was not only a symbol of the collaboration between Mexico and the United States, but it also helped to strengthen the policies of extradition and trial of foreign drug traffickers. An important precedent in the strategy to combat drug trafficking in the North American country. And with this, everything indicated that Guero would be behind bars until 2024, but the boss managed to have his way. On April 6th of the year 2016, it was confirmed that the boss was going to be released from the maximum security prison in the United States for good behavior. On June 15th of the same year, he crossed the border back south, handcuffed and guarded by American agents who handed him over to the Mexican authorities, under the warning of a California judge that he might be tempted to restart his operations. And he was imprisoned in the Altiplano prison.
These are the first images that are revealed, captured inside the Altiplano Federal Maximum Security Prison, in the cell where Hector Palma Salazar, El Güero Palma, is now imprisoned. He is wearing his standard beige uniform, and on his chest is the number that replaces his name. Inside the prison, he is prisoner 3950. With a blue ink pen, he signs an entry log sheet given to him by a guard. He looks at it for a brief moment and then enters his cell. There he leaves that document. The bulletproof glass door of his room is closed by one of the security guards who are tasked with watching him in person. 24 hours a day.
While the blonde man was being watched 24 hours a day, his lawyers began an exhausting search for legal loopholes and errors that would allow him to get out of prison. The Attorney General's office, for its part, dusted off the files of the drug lord, and they found exactly what they were looking for. The murders of a police chief and his escort that were still pending trial in Nayarit, in addition to the robbery of a delegation. However, the judiciary dismissed the case due to insufficient evidence. And then the Attorney General's office accused Guero of organized crime. And again, a Jalisco court acquitted him. The drug trafficker lived for weeks in the National Detention Center in Mexico City, converted into a small maximum security prison that houses high-profile criminals while their legal situation is defined. He was about to revert to his old habits, but a couple of months later, the Attorney General's office found another old unsolved murder he was accused of. He was imprisoned in Puente Grande, Jalisco, and later moved to Altiplano prison in the state of Mexico, where incidentally a year earlier El Chapo had escaped for the second time.
The authorities of this federal maximum security prison describe Güero Palma as a defeated, quiet man who has only received a visit from one of his sons. He doesn't ask for anything outside of the rules and fully and immediately complies with all the orders given to him.
Since then, his lawyers have been fighting against the clock to secure his release. In addition, Guero experienced another family tragedy before reaching this point because in December of the year 2019, Cynthia Mercedes, Roman Verdugo, and Maria Jimena Palma Romero, the drug lord's sister-in-law and nephew, were kidnapped by 4 armed men in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora. Since then, they have been reported as missing, the 10th of February of the year 2021. The Attorney General's office confirmed the discovery of the bodies of Maria Jimena and Cynthia Mercedes, evidently already deceased. That, according to the investigations, both women had been brutally gunned down with signs of physical suffering and also suffering prior to their lives being taken. In the early morning of February 25th of that same year, the media was shocked by the news that Güero was no longer in the Altiplano prison and had supposedly regained his freedom. There was also a rumor that he had been confined in the Nayarit Federal Prison to serve a sentence for the murder of 2 agents of the now-defunct Judicial Police, which occurred around 95. But quickly the waters calmed, the news was false, and the boss was still in the highlands. Or at least that was the case until May of 2021. It was reported that the 2nd District Court of Federal Criminal Proceedings acquitted El Güero of organized crime charges, ordering his release. You know how this thing about organized crime and the government works, the corruption, the money involved?
We're heading to Mexico now. A court ordered the release of the drug trafficker Hector El Güero Palma after 28 years in prison. He is one of the founders of the Sinaloa Cartel, along with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, but he was acquitted of the crime of organized crime. It is expected that in the next few hours he will leave the maximum security prison of Altiplano.
Supposedly, the Attorney General's office had not found elements to present new charges against Güero for federal crimes. Neither had 2 witnesses with the code names of Julio and Cesar been presented, who were supposedly going to testify against him for participation in organized crime activities. Both had accused Güero of trafficking 3.288 kilos of this white powder seized on July 19th of 99 in Tecomanco, Lima. Also of being responsible for a plane with $12 million seized in San Luis Rio Colorado, Sonora in October of 95. But as I tell you, due to the absence of the 2 men, Jose Gabriel Martinez Hernandez, lawyer for the founder of the Sinaloa Cartel, accused the Attorney General's office of using false witnesses to try to pin new responsibilities against his client. However, the Mexican government wanted to avoid at all costs international discredit and citizens indicating that the current regime was freeing the main actors of drug trafficking. They were already scrutinized for releasing Ovidio Guzman Lopez, El Chapo's son. Therefore, the judicial decision was made to keep El Güero behind bars without a specific charge against him. In May of 2023, the former leader of the Sinaloa Cartel was on the verge of getting out again, since a judge in Mexico considered that the crimes he was charged with had expired. Can you imagine the decision? It outraged the entire country, which still remembered the days of terror unleashed by the boss during the 80s. The president at that time, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, joined the heated complaints. Finally, the Attorney General's office executed a new arrest warrant against El Güero. At that time, they were trying to charge him for a series of crimes for which he had not yet responded. Aggravated homicide cases against police and law enforcement representatives were among them. During his time as the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, El Güero, then 63 years old, had to remain behind bars in the Altiplano maximum security prison. Finally, he still had a charge for the murder of a police officer, this being the only charge that Mexican justice had against him. In March 2024, Conrado Alcala Romo, a judge from the district of Zapopan, Jalisco, considered that there were irregularities in the process by which El Güero was charged, so he ordered the trial to be repeated. He granted protection to the drug trafficker, which annulled the formal imprisonment order with the aim of guaranteeing the accused's rights when being prosecuted. Therefore, while they continue to investigate the alleged irregularities, the drug trafficker will remain in prison. The Attorney General's office managed to file a review appeal against the judicial decision. Therefore, a court must study the ruling and decide whether to ratify it or not. As of the date of making this video, which is the beginning of the year 2025, the former leader of the Sinaloa Cartel remains arrested in the Altiplano prison, accused of the crime of homicide. We will probably soon know if he will be released or live the rest of his days in prison. Many fear that if he steps on Mexican streets again, he will take back the reins of the drug trade and terrorize the country, just as he did during the 80s. Here the questions are, will El Güero return to expand his reign of violence and terror? How many more innocents must die for his revenge to be truly complete?